Okay, shall we start, Arvind?
Yeah.
Okay, so welcome everyone to the probability session. So it's a pleasure to introduce Arvind Iyer. So he has been in this department for 8 years now. He's also joined with physics. So he works in combinatorics, probability, symmetric group theory, and mathematical physics. So it's a pleasure to have him speak about GOE fluctuations for alternating sign matrices.
Okay. Thanks, Manjunath, for the nice introduction, and thanks to the organizers for this invitation. Uh, so let me minimize this. Yeah. Okay. So I'll be talking about some joint work with Sunil Chitta from Durham and Kurt Johansson from KTH Stockholm, uh, uh, which we uploaded just last week on the archive, about GOE fluctuations for alternating sign matrices. So I think there are many probabilists in the audience who would know what GOE fluctuations are, but in any case, I will define them. And I'm pretty sure hardly anybody knows about alternating sign matrices. Okay, so let me introduce the topics. So here's the rough plan. I'll define ASMs, and I'll focus on the main question, which is what happens for large ASMs. I will relate this to an object called totally symmetric subcomplementary plane partitions. I know this is a mouthful, but we'll have a short form for it. And I will mention, if I have time, I will mention something about the key ideas of the proof, which involve these Gauss and Gauss trapezoids. Again, I don't expect it to. Okay, so what's an alternating sign matrix? It's an n by n of order n. It's an n by n matrix with entries which are 0 plus minus 1, such that all row and column sums are 1. And in each row and column, as you read from left to right, say, or from top to bottom, and you ignore the 0 entries, the terms will alternate. So you have 1, minus 1, 1. And because the row and column sums are 1, it has to necessarily start and end with a 1 in both rows and columns. So these objects came up in different contexts in different areas, so I don't want to get into that for now. But what was striking about them was there was an explicit conjecture for the number of ASMs of order n. And this was conjectured by Mills, Robbins, Ramsey in 1983. And here is this beautiful product formula. So it's a product of factorials upstairs, product of factorials downstairs, and a priori it's not clear it's an integer either. But it is. And the first few numbers go like so. So one thing to notice, by the way, please feel free to interrupt me with questions. One thing you might notice immediately is that permutation matrices are alternating sign matrices vacuously, or not. Well, the last condition is vacuous. So what else do you have? So the first non-trivial case. Okay, so here's a large example to show you that such things exist. So if you look along this row, for example, you see alternation of ones and minus ones, or this column. This column has this middle column has a single one, but then so as I said, permutation matrices are the first example of ASMs, but you have more. So the first non-trivial example occurs at size 3, and it's this matrix. So here is the alternating. Okay, so you can think about this in another way, and this was already known to physicists implicitly, although they did not focus on the combinatorial questions. So this is called the 6-vertex model or the square ice model. So let me define this formally in words, and the figure is meant to illustrate the idea. So what you do is you take a n by n subset of the square grid. You put oxygen atoms at the vertices. So in this case, n is 5. So you have a 5 by 5 grid. You put oxygen atoms, 25 oxygen atoms, on the vertices. And in the middle of every edge, horizontal or vertical, you put hydrogen atoms. So you'll see hydrogen atoms in this middle part here, here, and also in these vertical parts. In addition, you put extra hydrogen atoms to the left and to the right, but nothing on top. So you leave the top and the bottom empty, but you put extra hydrogens on the left and the right. And if you remember your chemistry, water is H2O. So each oxygen is going to be attached to 2 hydrogens. And there is, again, if you remember a little more chemistry, then you know that there's a phenomenon called hydrogen bonding. So each oxygen is surrounded by 4 hydrogens in the bulk. I mean, forget about the boundary for a second. So each oxygen is going to have a regular bond with 2 of the hydrogens and is going to have a so-called hydrogen bond with the others. Okay, so this is a model. This is a 2-dimensional model for water or ice. So that's why it's called the square ice model, because it sits on the square grid. Okay. So all this is hunky-dory, but how do you represent this mathematically? So what we are going to do is we are going to assign arrows to the edges so that the arrow points in the direction of the true bond. So in every edge, you will have a hydrogen atom, and it's going to be connected to either the left or the right or top or bottom. And in that direction, you have an arrow. Okay. So for example, okay, let's look at this one. So there'll be an arrow coming into this vertex from the left and an arrow coming in from the bottom, and an arrow going out from the top and from the right, okay, to this vertex. And this condition is satisfied for every vertex. And if you think about it, what this means is that there are 2 vertices coming in and 2 vertices going out. Okay. So just to illustrate again the 3 case. So there are going to be 7 configurations. So this domain wall boundary conditions corresponds to this hydrogens being here on the left and right and not on the top and the bottom, and that corresponds to the edges going outwards vertically, boundary edges going outwards vertically and inwards horizontally. Okay. And so this is called the 6-vertex model because there are 4 arrows. There are 4 edges adjacent to every vertex, incident to every vertex, and two go out and 2 go in. So 4 choose to 6 possibilities. Okay, so that's why it's called the 6-vertex. So this is one of those integrable models from equilibrium statistical mechanics. Originally, it was studied on the entire Z2, so the full plane. But starting in the 80s, people started looking at finite versions of these. And so what they would do is they would give weights, what are called Boltzmann weights, to local configurations. So for example, if you have 2 outgoing upwards and 2 incoming, 2 outgoing vertically and 2 incoming horizontally, you have some weight. If you have like this, you have some weight and so on. So the weight of a configuration like this will be the product of its local weights. And then the partition function is the sum of all of those weights. And these are very complicated formulas, so I'm not even bothering to show you what they are. But then something nice happens for the partition function, which is the sum of all of these. So in the statistical physics context, they were not interested in enumerating how many there are, but it is not too difficult to show that the number of 6-vertex configurations of size n with these domain wall boundary conditions, which I mentioned, are the same as the number of alternating sign matrices. Okay, so So there is interest in understanding the fluctuations of these configurations from the physics side and from the combinatorial side, wanting to understand what large random alternating ASMs or alternating sign matrices look like. So are there any questions about the basic definitions?
Sorry, is it obvious that these things correspond to alternating sign matrices?
Not obvious, but what I can tell you the starting point. So so there are two special. So among the 6 vertices, 4 of them are of the form that the vertices go through. I mean the arrows go through horizontally and vertically. So look at this one. It goes. What starts out going leftward continues to go leftward, and what starts out going bottom up continues to go bottom up. But there are 2 special ones, which are these. One of them is this, where both incoming are horizontal and both outgoing are vertical. That you think of as a 1 of the ASM. And there's the other one, which is here. Both outgoing are horizontal and both incoming are vertical. That you think of as a -1. So I have drawn this in exact correspondence with this. So that -1 in the center was that. And then you have to argue that this is a true bijection. So, but that's the starting point. Okay. Anything else? Okay. So let me come to large random ASM. So suppose you take a large. So you fix a large n and you pick a uniformly random alternating sign matrix. What is it going to look like? So there's been a lot of, we have a lot of intuition for studying for such things, mainly from random tilings, and which I don't have time to get into. But what will happen typically, or what is the expectation, is that on the corners, there'll be some frozen regions. So what will happen is that in the corners, things will tend to get more and more deterministic as you increase the size after you scale it down. And in the bulk, you will have a lot of disorder, and there'll be a curve separating the two. This is the general belief, and this is borne out by many different models, mostly from random tiling. And this curve that demarcates the 2 regions is called the Arctic curve, for some reason. Okay, so in the earlier part of the last decade, Colombo and Pronko gave an explicit conjecture for what this curve is going to look like, using some physics techniques. And using some other techniques, Colombo and Sportiello predicted the same limit shape. Okay. And so this is what it kind of looks like. So it may look like a circle to you, but it's actually an ellipse with a very small, whatever it's called, eccentricity or whatever. This was proved rigorously by Amol Agarwal last year in a paper in Inventiones, where he showed the limit shape for this and some other objects in the same shape, in the same universality class. Not universal, I mean of the same nature. But these are non-deterministic, these are non-determinantal models. So one has to work much harder. I mean, the random tiling models have a natural determinantal formulas, and things are kind of known. I mean, there's a whole industry devoted to understanding or devoted to proving results which involve for determinant point process. These become much harder. Okay, so what we are going to do now is to use another representation. This is a height function representation. So we call this a path corner sum matrix. And here's a formula, but don't look at it for now. I'll explain the intuition. So these are n by n matrices again, but these correspond to n+1 ASMs for some technical reason, where entries are all non-negative. The top row and the rightmost column are either n-1 or n, and the horizontal and vertical differences are either 0 or 1. So these are also in natural bijection with ASMs. Again, not too hard to prove, but this allows us to draw, think of this as non-intersecting lattice paths. So look at, for example, this PCSM. You can think of, so what we are going to do is we are going to have this kind of bricks placed at this angle, and we are going to have paths starting at the left vertical line, leftmost vertical endpoints, and ending at the bottommost horizontal endpoints. And they are going to go in the natural way, and the heights are assigned in kind of obvious way. So the height of every brick over here is the number of red lines to its bottom, to its southwest. Okay, so you can see that these correspond also naturally to height functions. So now for a large ASM like so, I mean for large ASM we construct the PCSM like so, and now you can see that you know there's some random structure here. The bottom part seems to be kind of frozen, and the top part is also seems to be frozen in the sense that there's no lines passing through there. And you can see that the left and the right are also frozen in the sense that you're going to have this kind of zigzag patterns over there. But what's going to be interesting for us, okay, so let me do some more transformations before I get to the key main object for our talk, is we are going to rotate this counterclockwise. And now you think of each path as some kind of as moving in time. Okay, so there's a height. So each path has a height, and it kind of moves in this way from left to right. And okay, so what we are going to be interested in is the highest path, which is this path over here in this example. And we are going to write it as a vector of length 2n plus 1. And you might be worried about ambiguities because, you know, what do I take as the height when it goes vertically? Well, we will take the height to be the topmost point by convention. So here, this will have height 1. This will have. But here, when it goes horizontally, the heights are no. And in particular, we are going to focus on the maximum of Tn. Okay. So that's the main object of our. That's the random variable for us. So Sunil has done some nice simulations using Glauber dynamics. So here is a random ASM, uniformly random ASM of size 100. And he has also drawn the limit shape. You see, it's not exactly a circle. And you can see that the max is, going to touch the circle. I mean, the curve. Okay. So for those of you who are not into random matrices, let me say what GOE is. So a random real symmetric matrix is said to belong to the Gaussian orthogonal ensemble, GOE. If you take the diagonal entries, so if you choose all the entries independently, take the diagonal entries from normal 0, normally distributed with mean 0 and variance 2, and the triangles above the diagonal, the upper triangular entries, as standard normals. Okay, normal with mean 0 and variance 2. Because it's real symmetric, the lower triangular entries are determined. Okay, so this is not the most general definition, but I mean, you can take some other distribution with the appropriate means and variances, but okay, this is good enough for me. So because it's real symmetric, all the eigenvalues are real, and you take the largest eigenvalue, call it lambda max, and you scale, you center it. I mean, so this will have scaling of, this will have mean of order 2 root n, and well, okay, not, yeah, that's right. So you take, you subtract it off and you scale it. So appropriately, then this limiting CDF is called the GOE trace equilibrium distribution. So it has an explicit formula which I'll mention in a second. Complicated, very complicated, but explicit. And there's a more slightly more complicated definition for random Hermitian matrices with again upper triangular and diagonal entries. And this is called GUE, the Gaussian unitary ensemble, GUE. And F2 of S is similarly constructed CDF, and that's called GUE distribution. I don't need anything more than that. I just wanted to define it. Okay, so these kind of distributions occur in many other processes. Some of which, I mean, last passage percolation, which is of interest to many in the audience. For example, TASEP, some other growth models. This 6-vertex model at some special parameters where it becomes a domino tiling problem. In all of those cases, you have these determinantal point processes, and then you have these kind of distributions occurring naturally.
So
Okay,
there was, Arvind, there was one question on chat. BB was asking whether that is n to the minus 1/6 or 1/6.
Oh, no, it is. So I have written this way just to remind you of central limit theorem. Yeah, it's it's written. You can write n to the 1/6 over here, right? So I just put it n to the minus. I deliberately did. Yeah, I think that's correct. Okay, so let me define the GOE kernel. So you have this one of these special functions known as the Airy function, which occurs in many physical contexts. So it's given by this integral formula, which converges. And we'll introduce this 2x2 kernel, this 2x2 matrix of functions. So I told you they're complicated. So this is an antisymmetric matrix. So K21 is going to be negative of K12, and they are given by this very complicated expressions, integrals involving the Airy function. And I don't expect you to absorb any of this. So recall the Pfaffian of an even antisymmetric matrix. This is so you might remember Cayley's theorem, which says that an even antisymmetric matrix, the determinant of an even antisymmetric matrix is a square of something, and that something is the Pfaffian. So it can also be written like a Leibniz expansion in terms of permutations, but notice that this is so the entries are not of the form AI sigma I, but rather A sigma 2i minus 1 sigma 2. Okay, and S2k is the set of permutations. So that this F1S, which the GOE trace equilibrium distribution CDF that I mentioned earlier, is given by this Pfaffian of this matrix minus the GOE kernel, which in terms of an explicit formula means an integration like this. Okay, so this is on L2S. Okay, so now let me state the main theorem. Okay, going rather slow. Okay, so the main our main theorem is that this maximum of Tn, which I mentioned here, which I mentioned earlier, which is this point in this simulation, suitably scaled by using this constant, suitably centered by this constant and scaled using this constant, converges in distribution to the CDF of the GOE traceable distribution. Further, we believe that the top path converges to something called the Airy-2 process, which I have not said what it is. But in particular, the central value, after again suitable scaling, centering and scaling, converges to the GUE distribution. Okay. So our strategy of the proof is to relate these ASM statistics to statistics of what are called these plane partitions, which I mentioned in the rest of the talk. And in earlier work with Sunil, we had given explicit but complicated formulas for correlations for TSS CPPs, and we have to do we use those and perform careful asymptotic analysis.
Arvind, there is a question. So Tn, you go back to your theorem. So Tn of 0 is, you're thinking of it as a graph evaluated at 0, right? I mean,
right. Yeah. So this goes from Tn minus n to Tn of n, and Tn 0 is exactly the middle point. I mean, max Tn is not necessarily at the middle point. Okay. Right. So in the last maybe 5 minutes, let me say what TSS CPPs are. So plane partitions are a generalization of partitions, which you usually represent pictorially as a Young diagram. So what you do is you think of boxes in a room, which are placed in a corner, such that the heights of the boxes in each row and each column weakly decrease as you go along any row and any column. Okay, so it's going downwards like this. And so, okay. Now, for various reasons, it turns out that it's interesting to fix the size of your room. So let's say fix an A by B by C room, and you look at all possible ways of putting plane partitions inside that. So in this figure, again stolen from the internet, we are looking, forget this right parts, just look at the left part. We are looking at all possible ways of placing boxes in a 2 by 2 by 2 room which satisfy the conditions of a plane partition. So the first row corresponds to the empty room. The second corresponds to placing a single box. The third row placing 2 boxes, etc., all the way up to placing 8 boxes. So there are total 20 of them. And so I should say in passing that McMahon proved a general product formula for the number of plane partitions in an A by B by C room. Okay, so then there were natural generalizations to consider. So there are various symmetry classes that one could consider. So for example, you could ask how many, now that you ask how many plane partitions are there in an A by B by C room, maybe you can ask how many vertically symmetric plane partitions are there in an A by B room. So for example, this is vertically symmetric, it's the empty room. Here this is also, but none of these are. This is, like that. So you could ask vertically symmetric. You could also ask, so if you sort of look carefully, you see that this is a hexagon actually. Your mind sort of projects this to 3 dimensions, but it is actually a hexagon. And so the dihedral group of the symmetries of the hexagon acts on this. So you could, for example, ask what are cyclically symmetric. So if you rotate the whole figure by 120 degrees, do you get the same thing or not? So this is called cyclically symmetric. Then you also have self-complementarity, and you have various symmetries, and the ultimate guy, which is the most symmetric object, is what is called TSS CPP, totally symmetric and self-complementary. So it has all the symmetries of the dihedral group in addition to being self-complementary. So the only fellow that satisfies that condition in a 2 by 2 by 2 room is this. Self-complementary means you replace boxes by holes in the other. Okay, so so it turns out, and this was proved by Andrews, that the number of TSS CPPs in a 2n by 2n by 2n box is the same as the number of alternating n by n alternating sign matrices. So this is a deep theorem. We have no understanding of why this is there. We don't have any bijection. We have more statistics also that are equinumerous for both of these, but we don't have we don't have an idea. So for example, here are the 7 TSS CPPs of size 3. Maybe you could have guessed this one, it's kind of natural object to consider, but then maybe this one also you could have seen, but the others you might not have been able to guess. But in general, it turns out to be the case. So what we use is okay, so maybe I'll skip all these details. So our strategy is to relate this max Tn to an appropriate random variable on the TSS CPP side. And Zeilberger proved this Gog-Magog trapezoid business, which I don't have time to mention. I can say it if during the question answer session. We use that to relate max Tn to an appropriate random variable. Then we define a point process on 0 through n integers using a Dymo model formulation of TSS CPPs. A lot of our work is on the asymptotic analysis of the Pfaffian kernel, this Pfaffian kernel, and we show that it converges to the G root. Okay, so that's it. Here are the references. This is Zeilberger's proof, Kuckerberg's proof. A lot of these figures I've taken from Rasool's nice book on the story of the proof of alternating sign matrix conjecture. This is our earlier paper with Sunil, which just got accepted to Transactions of the London Answer Set. So thank you for your attention.
Thanks, Arvind. So questions, comments, anyone? Are there any questions? I have one. So the reason why you can do it for maximum but not at a fixed location, is it because you don't understand this? I mean, in this bijection, somehow the max you can transfer, but I mean, not the bijection which you don't know, right? I mean that.
Right. So yeah, so that's exactly the point. Yeah. So our proof is rather special in the sense that it uses Zeilberger's proof of the ASM theorem, which shows that which shows something stronger than the fact that number of ASMs equals number of TSS CPPs. It shows that certain trapezoidal arrays, which I didn't have time to define, which are called Gog and Magog trapezoids, they are equinumerous, and here is some data for them. But that kind of magic only happens for max Tn. Yeah, that's it.
But so can you? Is it possible? In this, I mean, can you extract what is it that max corresponds to in the TSS SCPs, whatever that is, TSS CC?
Oh,
yeah.
Okay. So I don't have figures for those, but basically, okay, let me collect my thoughts. Right, so you can phrase the TSS-CPP problem as a problem of counting perfect matchings in certain non-bipartite graphs.
Mm-hmm.
And in those graphs, that corresponds to certain edges not being matched. So I'm sorry, I can't say more than that. I wish
okay, no, it's fine.
Figure, but basically, the positioning of the max having position blah is the same as a certain blah edge not being matched.
I see.
So, and because we had these formulas for the TSS CPPs, we had this inverse Castellane matrix for TSS CPPs. We could, we could in principle have it, and then a lot of this work was asymptotic analysis.
Okay. Okay.
So
thank-
I have a quick question. So is there a version of all this for a torus? I mean, where you have look at sort of squares identified and so on.
For ASMs, no. Well, yeah, no, we don't have, because the ASMs are not I mean,
Okay.
because the one, I mean, each row and each column has to start and end with a one, so it doesn't kind of, because it has to go 1 minus 1, 1 minus 1, 1 like that.
Oh,
So
I see. I see.
it-
Okay, fine.
it doesn't work.
fine, fine.
But maybe there is some modified object which works on the torus. But I mean, certainly people have analyzed the dimer model on toroidal graphs. So that's,
Yeah, that's what. Yeah. Thank
Any other questions? Okay, if not, let's thank Arvind for a very nice lecture. So thank you, Arvind. I don't know. Yeah. So people can unmute themselves. Okay, I don't know how it's done. Okay, thanks, Arvind. Anyway.